We've made it to the month of November. There's only 2 months left in 2021. So today I'm going to stop and rank all the October new releases that I saw, plus the 3 September new releases that I saw, from the worst to the best. Hi, my name is Sean, and I love to talk about movies way too much. With that in mind, go ahead and join me down below in the comment section. Share your ranking of all the October and September new releases that you saw. My list isn't the right list, it's just my list, and I would love to see yours. Also, if I missed kind of a smaller film that you think I would be interested in, be sure to let me know about it, and let's get started. In last place, Cinderella, a bizarre misfire on virtually every single level. Now, it's a movie set as a period piece, but it's a total 21st century retelling of the story from writers that pretty clearly find the Cinderella mythology to be sexist. So now the story exists largely to tear down the patriarchy and make it clear that Cinderella will choose her job over a man. Like, if that doesn't sound entertaining enough, it's one of those musicals where they just use pop songs and throw it into the movie as character development, and I don't really like any musicals that use that particular style. Even as just a musical, they underutilized some of their most talented singers, in particular Adele Dazeem.
Please welcome the wickedly talented one and only Adele Dazeem,
who barely does any singing inside of the film, so there just wasn't anything much for me. It seemed like the cast was having fun, but I wasn't. Number 10, Injustice. Some of the most interesting DC source material is turned into one of the worst DC animated films. Now, it starts off well enough, establishing the basic premise about some terrible event setting off Superman that causes the Justice League to split in two as to what they need to do to stop more horrific things from taking place, and should they be doing more. That's a good enough dramatic point to cause conflict in the team to drive a story forward. But they don't trust that plot line, so they start throwing in all this other weird stuff that just kind of ruins the whole experience. So they feel like they have to add in an additional villain into the mix so our heroes will work together to overcome this common foe. It just kind of cheapens the drama when you set up a good enough reason why our heroes would fight one another. And then the thing that really ruins it, there's a character that dies, and then we follow them into the afterlife, and then they basically come back as a ghost and possess someone. Like, that actually happens in this movie. I guess maybe that's a little bit of a spoiler, but I tried not to tell you who it was. And you just watch like, what? Where are they going with this? Why is this happening in one of these DC animated movies? So as much as there was a lot of potential for something really fun and cool here, they just ruined it by not trusting that central conflict that's actually established pretty well. Real quick, as a point of reference, all the rest of the movies on this list, I would go positive on. I enjoyed them. The next few, they have their flaws and things like that, but still, I had fun with them. They delivered enough of what they were supposed to deliver that I would go thumbs up even on the next film on this list. In 9th place, Halloween Kills, an odd mix of gnarly violence, good ideas, and bad execution. Now, this is a Halloween film that throws out all of the classic suspense and tension building that the original Halloween was known for, and it replaces it with all-out carnage pretty much from beginning to end. And I'm actually okay with that. Not every movie needs to follow the exact formula that made things work, and sometimes it's just fun to just have pure payoff. The Michael Myers just slaughtering people, carnage candy from beginning to end. I was actually okay with that. And there's some ideas in the movie that I thought were the right direction to take things, in particular the idea of the city knowing its own history of these violent outbursts. And so then when some of the townspeople learn Michael has returned, they go into action and form a mob, and mobs are dangerous and do bad things. The idea of that, I think, is really good and somewhat compelling in certain ways. But because they were dead set on this not being the final entry, the mob can't win. They were dead set on it being a trilogy, so we have to be able to set up future things. And it just made for a situation where it just felt like Michael Myers just had way too much plot armor. They leaned way too much into him being invincible and everyone is a moron. And even with the mob stuff, what happens at the hospital feels a little bit like, well, nobody has any clue what Michael Myers looks like, because he doesn't look anything like that guy. And I'm pretty sure these people would have watched Michael Myers' trial, given how much he's defined their lives. So there's just a bunch of stuff that it delivered the carnage that I wanted. There's some ideas went, that's the right direction to go. And then in the execution, it just really knocked it back further for me. Next up, Army of Thieves, an interesting little Army of the Dead spin-off prequel that's not a zombie story. It's set in a world where there's a zombie apocalypse taking place in Las Vegas that has effects on the world of the story that kind of sets things in motion for this to take place. But it's not a zombie movie really at all. It's a heist movie and sort of a rom-com at its core. The thing that really pulled it together and made it work for me is this lead character who's just so charming and endearing in this naive way where he just loves safes and the history of everything kind of going on with them. And he has all these quirks to the way he does things. And it's very artistic in nature. And he just loves that he's being included and gets to experience all these safes that he's been studying his entire life. And there's something about a character like that, you can just very easily root for them. And that's kind of what makes this movie work. You know, when it comes to the actual heist plot line, it has all the tropes, the investigator with a personal investment, the double crosses, the team getting together. You know, so a lot of it's pretty familiar, but that doesn't mean that it's not a lot of fun. And we had fun with this one in our household. Number 7, Last Night in Soho, the latest Edgar Wright film, abandons his usual bag of tricks and does something entirely new, where normally his films are fun and funny. This one really is a horror suspense thriller that's kind of the story about the small town girl going to the big town. It's got plenty of 60s nostalgia for London. It's all this stuff totally different from what he's known for, but it still has all of his visual flair on display, his talent for crafting a sequence and knowing how to stage interesting visuals and bringing it all to life in a way that makes it pop. At its core, it's got elements of horror, a murder mystery, surreal, dreamlike sequences. It's just a bunch of familiar things combined together into something new. Now, I did think it lost a little bit of steam as you move into the third act, and as creative and inventive as the first 2 acts were, when it starts actually answering the questions and resolving the mysteries, felt pretty straightforward and traditional, and all of that creativity seemed to be missing at that point in time. So it kind of ends on a little bit of a disappointing note, but there's still plenty of talent on display, and it's an interesting film. It's an interesting film to experience. And that's followed by Malignant. The latest James Wan film is one of the weirdest horror films I've seen a major studio greenlight in a very long time. It starts off conventional enough, and as it goes along, it just gets weirder, and by the third act, it goes full-blown bonkers bananas. And it's the sort of movie that only someone like James Wan at the current place in his career could get greenlit with this kind of budget. After a decade straight of making mega blockbusters for big studios and spinning off the Conjuring movies and doing Fast and the Furious and Aquaman, he has made Warner Brothers so much money that he was able to get them to greenlight this very weird niche horror film. And I love that a movie like this exists with this kind of production and budget behind it. Now, not all of it works. Sometimes I was like, oh, we're getting a little bit weird here. It's certainly not going to be to everybody's taste. It leans so much into the campy at times, the body horror, the just bonkers ideas, that some people just find the whole thing off-putting. But if you're a horror fan, if you like movies that take risks, go out there and really go for it, that's what this is. There's a ton to appreciate. There's a ton to have fun with, and it delivers a slam bang finale. Like I said, I didn't love all of it, but I love that it does exist in the world. In 5th place, Venom, Let There Be Carnage. Now, for me, this was a big improvement over the original Venom. The original Venom, I thought, once Eddie and Venom got together, it was this very fun, strange take on kind of this odd couple relationship with an alien symbiote that's eating people's heads. But to get to the two of them, it was like 45 minutes of clunky storytelling and taking way too long to deliver too little for the film. I thought with this one, because Eddie and Venom are already together at the beginning,
I will let you eat everybody! Promise! I promise! Oh yeah!
It's just from beginning to end, all the stuff I actually liked about the original Venom. That weird odd couple relationship. It's like a rom-com, but it's not. And you have Venom going into battle, wanting to eat people, making his wacky jokes and statements throughout the entire film. Adding to that, I think Carnage is more interesting than Riot. Woody Harrelson is, of course, always just a fun performer. And so him in this Bonnie and Clyde bananas relationship, looking to get married and killing anyone that gets in their way. There's a lot of fun carnage in that. Now, it's also a movie that moves at a breakneck speed for better and for worse. Like, it never has time to have any lulls because it just moves at such a breakneck pace. But especially when you watch it a second time, you start to notice where they trimmed a few things out. And I think there were some whole plot lines plucked out of this movie just so that they could get the runtime that they wanted in that fast-moving roller coaster ride. So I'm hoping we actually get like a director's cut when it comes out on Blu-ray so we can see a longer version of some of that stuff that seemed to be tightened up maybe a little bit too much. But in general, it delivered the fun I wanted, delivered the goofiness I wanted, and it didn't get bogged down in any superfluous subplots or slow down really.
That costume is amazing!
Thank you.
I had fun with it. I've actually seen it a bunch of times with the way the universe played out. And in a totally different direction, in fourth place, The Last Duel. Ridley Scott's dramatic period piece film about three different people's perspectives on an event that took place and the decades-long build-up to that encounter. And what made it so complicated is essentially it tells the story of the friendship and breakdown of the friendship of these two men from the three lead characters' perspectives. And it really takes its time telling this decade-long story three different times. So for some people that will try your patience. It won't be for everyone. But if you're in the mood for kind of this slow burn take on the different ways that we perceive ourselves and the people around us and the way that we tend to think of ourselves a little bit better than we were and think of others a little bit worse than they were, I think there is a good bit to be delivered in this film. The other thing, I might have even put it marked it a little bit higher, graded a little bit higher, but it doesn't really leave much ambiguity to the actual central event. And I think that cheapens a little bit going with the gimmick of telling the story three different times from three different perspectives, if at the core of the story is what exactly did happen at this encounter. In the two different takes that we give that really spell it out and show it, they're not different enough to warrant necessarily this form of storytelling. I think that's where I think they really needed to put a little bit more effort into fine-tuning that a little bit so that you could have a little bit more ambiguity as to what was taking place. And I think they were maybe worried about in the current climate of what that would mean if they were ambiguous about it. But by not doing that, it cheapened some of the greater effect of all the other great things happening in the film. But I think also there's on a technical level, set designs, acting, all of it is just great. It looks amazing. It looks like you've gone back to a different time, a different place. Performances are great. And like I said, I found most of it very compelling. Even though we saw the same story three times, I was invested throughout the entire thing trying to figure out where do they just see themselves so differently, themselves as the hero and others as villains, and how did this happen? I just wish in that key plot point they had a little bit more nuance and ambiguity to it. Real quick, before I give you my top three, remember to join me down below in the comments section. What's your ranking of the October and September new releases that you saw? The reason I combined them together is because I skipped September because I only saw 3 September movies, and that didn't seem worthy of a video in and of itself. But people kept asking me how I ranked the September movies. It was like, it's only 3 of them. Might as well throw it into my October video. And here we are. Also, I've done a ton of reviews of movies. If you want to know kind of my take on 2021 movies, did I say 2020? 2021 movies, you can check that out right up here in this playlist. I've covered dozens and dozens of movies up to this point in time. In third place, Shang-Chi, a solid addition to the MCU, and finds once again how to make a movie that fits into the MCU mythology, that feels like an MCU film, but also adds in a bunch of new genres as it's very much pulling inspiration from Hong Kong cinema, different branches of it too. You've got plenty of Jackie Chan influence, you've got kind of that wire fu, Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon influence going on, as well as a bunch of other stuff in there as well. Well, once again, all having that MCU shine around the entire thing. Adding to that, or to that point, I guess, per se, has some of the best fights, hand-to-hand fights of the entire MCU. And then the central villain is given a lot of time to be developed and making him a compelling, well-rounded character who's not just a cardboard cutout. He's not just an evil guy that wants to do evil things. He's a person torn between conflicting values who himself has been misled. So all in all, like just another solid film where the MCU engine just knows how to consistently deliver entertaining films. I think it is held back a little bit by some of those constraints of being an MCU film. First one, I think they tried to amp up the action a little bit too much. So like the bus sequence has a little bit too much spectacle in it that it cheapens the stuff that does work in it. Like we don't need CGI people jumping between an exploding bus and him spinning all around the outside of it to be exciting. Trust your choreography. Not everything has to be big spectacle sequence. Second one, I think they put in a little bit too much humor. I mean, some of it certainly made me laugh, but then they added in humor at times where we're in the middle of like a tense action sequence and then they're like, joke! And it cuts the tension in a bad way. And the third one, it felt like they just had to put in too many MCU characters, too many ties to things. And I think some of that hurt the film, not letting it just stand on its own. But all in all, a very solid addition to the MCU. Our runner-up, Dune, a big sci-fi epic. And in this movie's case, it truly is an epic that's made for adults. They don't feel the need to water everything down. They don't feel the need to throw in an action sequence or a joke every few minutes. It actually takes its time to build out the world, to explain who the characters are, what their connections are to other people, and watch as the conflict unfolds, as they're battling for control of this planet. And it takes the time to help you understand why all of this matters to the plot and why all of it matters to individual characters. And it trusts the audience to actually have the attention span of a grown-up. On technical levels, everything is flawless. It looks amazing. It looks believable. The performances are solid. The score fills things out properly and brings out the right emotions. And so just a rock solid sci-fi film for adults that gives us this amazing, massive world that you want to explore. And my original scoring on this one and placing and kind of rankings was based around them having not greenlit a sequel yet. Since then, they have greenlit a sequel, and I think that even kind of removes some of my biggest frustrations with the film, is that you get 60% of the way through this movie and you immediately go, there's no possible way they're going to resolve any of these plot lines by the time this movie is over with, and you get to the end of it, and they don't. And that's frustrating if you don't have a sequel coming. As soon as they say, we got a sequel coming, it just makes you feel better about all that, because it means, right, yeah, it's part one, cool. We're going to get part two, so I'm okay with the fact that not everything is resolved. And so maybe upon rewatch, I might even switch around these top two. I really dug Dune. But coming in first place is No Time to Die, the final Bond film from Daniel Craig. Based off the placement here, pretty obviously, I thought it was a great send-off to this version of the character. And with Daniel Craig's Bond, what they did is they made a more vulnerable character that actually has connections to the people all around him. And he grows, he changes, and he's a person with an actual life. He's not just the spy, he's not just the playboy, he's not just the assassin. He's a person at the core of it. And so this movie was the natural fulfillment of the journey that he's been on, and the different plot threads they've established, the reluctance that's inside of him, and his connection to the government, his connection to the people around him. And so then they found a way to tell a story that resolves all of that. And because he's a Bond that does have connections, when something happens to the people around him, you feel something. So it makes it a much more emotional film than most traditional Bond films. Adding to that, it's just jam-packed with big, gigantic, awesome action sequences that are just some of the best of the franchise. And they're not necessarily always in the most exotic locations or the most like wildest, craziest things happening. But what takes place, whether they're in a forest, they're on a bridge, they found all of these cool action shots to do that are totally convincing. And while all sorts of visual effects were on display to make them happen, they look like they just happened right there on set. And that's really what you want from action. Add to that, there is some really nice little humor in there that just kind of spices things up from beginning to end. So for me, I've only seen the movie once at this point in time, but I thought it was one of the absolute best films in the long-running franchise. It pulled out big emotions. It was a lot of fun. It made me sad at times, and the action was awesome. So it comes in at number 1. If you enjoyed this video and want more just like it, check out that playlist right over there with my other reviews of 2021 films. Thank you so much for watching, and keep talking movies too much.